I will start with a formal introduction. So good afternoon to everyone who's joined us online. Firstly, let me formally welcome you all to this Diversity Project Veterans Workstream event. My name is Kelly Mullane and I lead the Veterans Workstream for the Diversity Project, and I'm also the co-chair of the Military Network at Northern Trust. So all businesses have thoroughly been tested by this pandemic and have had to adjust considerably. And the purpose of today's event is to learn more about the British military support to the government and our population in the fight against COVID, what has amounted to the largest ever homeland operation undertaken in peacetime. So importantly, we're also going to learn about the unique leadership and crisis management ability of the military and what we as businesses can learn from their approach. So I am honoured today to be joined by Brigadier Tingey, who is the Chief of Staff for the Headquarters Standing Joint Command, and Lieutenant Colonel Simon Oxley, who is the SA1 Regional Infrastructure Cell Southwest. Now, as with all of these virtual events, we want to ensure we're as interactive as possible. So please go ahead and post your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Now, if I may, I'm going to hand over to you both to introduce yourselves a bit further and perhaps explain a bit more about your role in this unprecedented operation and why you think the military were called upon to support the government. So shall I hand over to you first, Brigadier?
Yeah, absolutely, Kelly. I take it what you'd like us to do is a brief introduction, and then we will sort of move ahead with the
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. All right, good. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today about the work of the United Kingdom's Standing Joint Command, of which I am fortunate to be the Chief of Staff. It is genuinely great to be here, so I'm very grateful for the invitation. As some of you may have seen from my bio, and as Kelly just mentioned, my name is Brigadier Tingey, and amazingly, to myself at least, I've been in the Army now, serving in the British Army for over 30 years. And Kelly hasn't said this to any of you yet, but I was an instructor at Sandhurst when she was a cadet, so that might generate some questions in itself. Broadly speaking, I've spent about half of my time, as it happens, in training establishments such as Sandhurst as an instructor, or the Defence Academy more recently, all working in the Ministry of Defence in London, and I've done that on 3 different occasions. But most importantly and most enjoyably from my perspective, I've spent the other half of my career commanding soldiers. So most recently, 2,000 US soldiers in Southeast Afghanistan. I've been the Standing Joint Command's Chief of Staff since September. So effectively since the beginning of the second COVID-19 wave. And as such, for the last 5 months have been directly responsible to the commander here for the military support provided to testing programs, vaccine rollout, outbreak management, including ongoing support to the NHS, other government departments and various agencies across the UK. And so I'll leave it there. I'll hand over to Simon, and then I'll take it on.
Brigadier, thank you very much. So hi everyone, my name is Lieutenant Col Simon Oxley. Slightly different to the Brigadier, so I'm now 35 years in the military. So what from that, as I started off as a young boy, I have served as every single rank now, apart from obviously Lieutenant, but got commissioned about quite a few years ago now, but my main job now is to look after the infrastructure for the Army in the Southwest. My experience, I have been really fortunate, been all over the world with my wife, served in Brunei, Cyprus, Falklands twice, Germany twice, so yeah, been very fortunate, and that most of that's been on the infrastructure side of life, so quite a lot of experience on that. But I did start out as a young lad driving earth movers, been lucky enough at sort of like 21 years old to be turned the lights off at 12 o'clock at night while I'm operating a 75-ton earth mover, which is always great fun to do, especially when you think you're going to be attacked at night time. But yeah, fantastic career I've had, really looking forward to it. 3 years left, but the challenge now is obviously to get the infrastructure sorted out for the Army across in the Southwest. That's it from me for the moment.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. So I'm going to come to the Brigadier first, and I'm going to ask you why you think the military were called upon to assist with our government's reaction to COVID.
Do you want me to ask that question, or shall I give you sort of a little bit of a download and then sort of take questions from there?
Go for it.
Okay, all right. Let me start by providing, I think would be really useful for everybody, an overview of Defence's support throughout the ongoing pandemic, which has been coordinated here in the Standing Joint Command, which is the headquarters, as it happens, that is responsible for providing military support to all UK operations. And in order to do this, we have a network of 10 joint military commands, JMCs. We have 7 in England and a further 3 in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And through these, we have a huge network of contacts across local and regional authorities and communities. Now, what we would normally do in the case of a crisis needing to provide military support, we'd activate one of those joint military commands. For example, if we wanted to provide support during floods, and we've done that many times over the recent years, as I'm sure that everybody is fully aware. For Operation Rescript, however, which is what we call in the military the operation to support the government's response to the pandemic, we activated all of those 10 JMCs at the same time. And that's the first time that's ever been done, literally. So that kind of gives you an idea right at the beginning of the scale of the operation, the military operation to support the ongoing government response. And in parallel to that, we expanded the headquarters here from about 23 people to over 280 in under 2 weeks. So a real swelling of people and capability. And then we replicated that as well in each of those 10 joint military commands. So all of the regional footprints were also reinforced with officers and planners and people to support the effort. I think it's quite interesting at the very start of the operation, which was amazingly over a year ago now, we stood up thousands, literally thousands of Navy, Air Force, Army, regular and reserve troops, forming in those early days what was known as the COVID response force or support force. Now, as the operation progressed, the requirement became far more focused, and we realized early on that it wasn't so much the mass that was needed, although elements of it were. What we really needed was a broad range of specialists, and that's very much been the case over the last year, and certainly is what we're seeing now. Medics, for example, being a really sought after commodity, and I'll come back to that shortly. And also, to a certain extent, the unique military skills that the armed forces have. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. It wasn't just a military effort, though, and I think it's worth highlighting this from the outset, that we spread the effort across a number of defence organisations. For example, the Defence Equipment and Support Agency and the Defence Science and Technology Laboratories, DSTL, both been involved extensively over the last year. I think it's worth sort of highlighting right at the front of this that over the last year, around about 20,000 service personnel at one point or another have been involved in this operation, Operation Rescript. So let me just talk a little bit, I think would be worth talking about the type of support that we've provided. So I think it probably generate quite a few questions. I think firstly, and arguably most importantly, we deployed over 1,200 planners into local resilience organisations, NHS regional hubs, other government departments like the Cabinet Office, the Department for Health and Social Care, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. And then simultaneously, we deployed planners into the Scottish Government, the Welsh Government, the Civil Contingencies Group in Northern Ireland. And I think significantly what those planners brought, and this is why I think it's arguably the most important capability, is they brought experience and expertise at planning in a crisis. And doing so at pace, and doing so within an ever-changing situation. So I think that's one aspect. 1,200 planners we pretty much emptied our Defence Academy of senior career courses, the Advanced Command and Staff course, intermediate. We took all of those young officers out of those organisations and put them out into government locations and regional hubs. So really important. I think we also assisted in the development, construction and manning of the Nightingales, the Louisa Jordan and the Dragonheart hospitals, using engineers and medical planners, as well as commercial expertise and the networks of our engineer and logistics staff corps. And I'm sure Simon in a moment will talk a lot about that, quite frankly, amazing organisation and the support that they provided in the early days and continuing to do so. On testing, which you will have all been very much aware of, we put one of our logistic brigades, including the brigade commander, into the Department for Health and Social Care, helping with their planning and implementation. And in addition, we sent our troops to support the regional testing sites and the testing effort in care homes. Mobile testing units, or MTUs, were a game changer, and many of you may have been tested in one of those sort of capabilities. The units, in fact, were designed by military engineers in a weekend, over the course of a very busy weekend, but over about 48 hours. At its peak, we sort of deployed 236 of them across the country, across the UK, and they were manned by 3,000 troops. So they were a game changer, quite frankly. They gave us greater reach, greater capacity at a crucial time. And when we handed them all over to civilian contractors who are still operating them, the military had conducted over 930,000 tests. So, a big effort in that MTU space. Our testing, of course, is ongoing, and our involvement has broadened considerably since those early days. We've helped improve laboratories, testing capacity in laboratories. We've facilitated testing in schools, which, as we all know, schools in England will go back very shortly. But the testing facilities that will be used by staff have been set up and supported by the military over the last few months. And I think most visibly what we've been doing, and you will all have been tracking this, is community testing, targeted community testing in towns, cities, and across the UK. You may remember the 2,000 troops that deployed into Liverpool last November. And they very much launched this mass testing in communities very successfully. It was in many ways, it was the biggest testing that we've done, but also was a pilot. And the lessons that were learnt in that have been rolled out to further tasks in Merthyr Tydfil, Medway, Kent, Derbyshire, Lancashire, Yorkshire, and most recently, and still ongoing, in Greater Manchester and Scotland, which started on Monday. And of course, everyone will be aware that over the festive period, our people deployed overnight, literally overnight, provided welfare support, and eventually carried out 37,000 tests down in Kent in order to clear the backlog of vehicles and hauliers caused by the closure of the border. So that was a big task, and that kept most of us very busy for the Christmas period. I think, what's an amazing statistic that my team told me only last week is that the military have now administered over 1.5 million tests across the UK using the various things that I've just described. I think I'll just move on to talk about PPE, because that was a big effort in the early days. We provided planners at the departmental level, procurement support, troops to work in warehouses and distribution nodes. And another of our logistic brigades drove the change from a national demand-led system to a push system of PPE distribution. And that was a really significant change, because at its height, what it enabled was 25 million items of PPE to be delivered across the UK every day. And to put that into perspective, Amazon on average delivers 28 million items per day across Europe. So the scale of that task was huge and facilitated, as it happened, partly by the work of some amazing reservists using the skills that they brought from Amazon and Google and eBay and other such organizations, and then put them into a military national crisis context. Interestingly, that same brigade is now working in the vaccine task force. Brigadier Phil Prosser, who's a good friend of mine, been on the news many times, but his brigade is now helping the NHS run the vaccine programme, both from within London in terms of the planning and coordination effort, and by deploying hundreds of defence medics and troops as part of what we call the Vaccine Quick Reaction Force. And they've been administering vaccines around the country and the devolved administrations for a number of months now, and they are part of that effort to get people vaccinated. A small part, don't get me wrong, the NHS are providing most of that capability, but we are plugging gaps and sometimes getting to the remote areas where our military personnel can deploy into those areas to get people vaccinated that can't get to vaccination centres. And I think, other things that we've provided, drivers for ambulances and oxygen tankers, we've provided mortuary services, casualty evacuation, high dependency, patient transfer, and recently, and I think most significantly over the last month or so, we've deployed hundreds of additional medics and thousands of troops into the NHS who were really feeling the pressure over the sort of Christmas, New Year, January period, and they've been providing much needed support into those areas, and I get amazing sort of feedback on a daily basis about how those people are doing and the support that they're providing. And I think I'll just conclude this bit by just sort of explaining that we constantly reassess and review the situation as we go through the provision of this support. And we like and do proactively step away from tasks, hand them over to government organisations, to civilian contractors, in order for those organisations to provide the enduring solution, but also to enable us to think ahead, to plan, and to prepare, quite frankly, for what the virus might throw at us next. And that, as you will know from your own experience, is sort of classic military thinking, getting a job done, but extracting and moving on, thinking about what's coming next. I think I'll just conclude, and sorry if I've taken a little bit too long, but I wanted to give you that overview, which I thought would generate some questions. Just to briefly talk about the unique capabilities that I think military bring to, or have brought to this sort of resilience operation. I think there are three that are particularly worth highlighting. First, the ability to generate mass and to do it rapidly. And as I explained at the beginning, we stood up 20,000 troops in a matter of days, and a significant proportion of those have deployed over the last year on some task. Many of them have deployed on multiple tasks. And I think, secondly, the ability to understand, plan, and deliver in a crisis, and again, to do so at pace. And I think, finally, typically military personnel have a high level of resilience built up after years of experience on challenging operations in austere environments, frequently enduring long hours in fluid and unpredictable circumstances. So I think, we bring many capabilities, but I think, if I wanted to highlight three, I would say mass, pace, and resilience are things that we have brought to this ongoing sort of level of military support, and we will continue to do that as we go forward. One final comment, if I may, and I just wanted to say that I think that this operation, the scale of it, the complexity, the challenge has brought out the very best in our people. We've tapped into every single part of the military, the Royal Navy, the Army, the Air Force, the regulars, the reserves, the civil servants, the wider defence community, as I've already highlighted. And from my perspective here as the Chief of Staff, it's it's a privilege, quite frankly. It's a privilege to be part of the ongoing effort. And I have to say, on a daily basis, I'm humbled by the stories I hear about what our people are doing, testing, providing vaccines, helping in the NHS. It's genuinely humbling, the work that they're doing across all the communities in the UK. And we'll continue to do that, of course, as long as the government needs us to do that, the NHS needs us, and as long as that help is required, we'll continue to do so. So I've probably taken up a little bit too much time. I apologise, but thank you everybody for listening. Look forward to the questions.
Thanks, Brigadier. And it's interesting because your response there is generating lots of questions and comments, but I will read out a couple around amazing leadership and support that you're providing. Thank you. What an incredible effort do you feel? It's just, you're right, it's humbling to see. But those three things that you highlighted there around the ability to work at scale, the ability to work at speed, and the resilience are all the messages I tend to send out to these civilian organisations about the real qualities that veterans, ex-military personnel can bring to civilian organisations. And I think the COVID operation has been a massive testament to that. So I'm not going to take up any more time. I'm going to hand over to Simon, Lieutenant Colonel Oxley. Could you give us a little bit more I guess more of the tactical view, and maybe touch upon any unexpected obstacles and how your team overcame them.
Kelly, Brigadier, thank you very much. And this is everyone. This is sort of leading on from Brigadier. So we were under SJC as Command Side of Life. I was part of 170. So this was my last job. I was the 2IC of 66 Works Group, part of 170 Infrastructure Engineer Group. So who are they? They are the technical arm, if you like, of the MOD. Highly skilled individuals that are infrastructure focused, both abroad on the whole sort of UK government estate and also UK resilience. So heavily involved in lots of the stuff, flooding going on. Personally, I got involved in Whaley Bridge last year, and it's one of those things. So as you can imagine, like the Brigadier said, we are permanent and reserve as well elements that have got those experts. So we had a plethora of people that we could pull on. And some of the examples I'll give you, so we've got professionally qualified engineers. These guys have designed some civil, military, mechanical and electrical. We have clerk of works, which for everyone's benefit, Kelly's brother is a clerk of works that actually works for me at the minute. But then we also have a plethora of other trades as well. So as you can imagine, the Royal Engineers overall, a very, very technical capability that we've got. And that's what we were drawn on from the actual Rescript Side of Life. So day one in the early days of last year, I was called as the 2IC from SJC with a tasking to send a recce team, if you like, to go to Cambridge to look at possibly one of the first hospitals. And this shows some of the flexibility. So we had a two-man team in a vehicle within about 6 hours, gone out the door, heading towards Cambridge. Very quickly it was identified through SJC that that was not going to be the primary location. So I phoned them up and said, guys, where are you? And said, funny enough, we're just coming up to the M1. And I said, great, turn right and head for Earl's Court. When they arrived at Earl's Court, they were the first people there, so walking around Earl's Court looking for people. And I'll come on to more of the story of why and where's later on. From the initial deployment, then within literally 3 days, we had to provide another 10 teams, that was with the vehicles, all the support equipment that they could live on their own, they're self-sustaining for 2 to 3 days, to push out for the rest of England. That was the initial concept. Later on, our sister works groups then pushed out to Scotland, like the Brigadier said, to Scotland and Wales to support there. But I am going to focus on sort of England at the minute. Within those first few days, so I also had to set up a HQ, which is something that we hadn't actually got within sort of 170, an ops room, if you like, within 170, but we set up really quickly with obviously everyone's support and backing. Within those first 3 days, we looked at in the region of about 740 locations across England. So that shows you the diversity and capability that our guys had to do really, really quickly. And the Brigadier's words when it says at pace is unbelievable. From that, we then whittled it down and we then had 74 locations that the guys on the ground then went and actually wrecked. And your brother down in the southeast was a busy, busy bloke driving around. And that was a two-man team, sometimes up to four-man team. So yeah, you can see the adaptability that these guys got. And it was an ever-changing environment, working with the local NHS teams. And that's the other thing to really stipulate. We were working with the NHS. We weren't working for or about, we were working with them and assist them on what they were doing. So from that, we got it down to 74. Then obviously, you know that it got whittled down to the sort of Nightingale hospitals that were actually there. Some of the key things, and this is where it comes to. So NHS are designed, most infrastructure organisations are designed to deliver over a long period of time. What we brought to the party was to get that capability, the crisis management, to look at a problem, to look at it really quickly, to make some really, really decisive and hard decisions, and said, this is what we're going to drive forward. And that's what we did. So in Earl's Court, those first days, the guys were telling me on that initial thing, and the medics turned up as well, so the military medics were there. That first meeting was quite difficult, if you like, but it took that military thing to stand up and say, right, this is what we want to do. Identify what the outputs were really, really quickly. But then, of course, all those agencies that are dealing with this on a routine basis kicked in very, very quickly. But it was that initial start to planning at pace and to make some really, really difficult decisions. And there's two quotes I'll get from the NHS side of life, and you'll get it. To make difficult decisions and to give advice and guidance in a high tempo environment at pace, which was key. And the other one was decisive thinking from self-motivated service personnel in a professional manner. And that was something really nice to hear from the NHS side of life. Leading on to that, not only do we have the hospitals to look after, there was quite a few other areas that we're looking at, and the Brigadier alluded to one, which was the initial mobile testing facilities. And a certain general mentioned it. It was something like scrap heap challenge. He came down to visit one of our sheds. And as you can imagine, we had a couple of vehicles stripped down, stripped all over the place. We had guys going all over the place, trying to contract suppliers to try and get freezing capability, lights to go in a van. But it was the support that we got. We even got a trailer and a support equipment from the Canals and Rivers Trust that they said, here, what would you like? So the support that we got, but it was to have that confidence as the military person to pick up the phone. And this is where the communication piece comes in, both verbally and sort of written, that we could speak to people, ask them difficult questions and say, this is what we want. So they quickly understood what they needed and they could provide as well. And I don't think any company that we spoke to ever said no. So that was just phenomenal. And then to lead on, why it was a success. And this is then linking in why us as military brought that success piece to the NHS and the COVID-19 rescript sort of support. And there's a couple of bullet points I've written down. And I'll start with training. Us in the military get that routine training delivered to us, throughout our army careers. But that includes that we've also got, so I think we're one of the largest sort of employers and also sort of trainee capability that we've got in the UK. I think it's in the region of about 90% of our courses are all civilian qualified as well, so they get civilian qualified. You lead on to that, you've got, so I do apologise, my dog is scratching at my door, so if you can hear scratching, so I do apologise about that.
Absolutely.
Teamwork in the military is just key, but that is key, but also the individual capabilities as well. So that comes on to the initiative side of life. We give our guys so much of the teamwork, ethos, and building onto that. But we give them within the mission statement, and that was clearly given to us when the guys were actually on the ground, that initiative to be flexible and move around. We then come on to the problem solving and strategic thinking. These guys are taught through all their courses and also when they're in operations, that capability to turn around and say, okay, I've been given a task and I've got to make that difficult decision. And the decision was to feed that back into the NHS. And this was evident at some times. So we did actually have people embedded in NHS London, and we were feeding back into those. But because it didn't help us in certain circumstances, because we were so quick at providing that details, that the details weren't able to get through the NHS system. So there was a conflict. But then we resolved that really quickly. How? Because a guy came up with a military system and said, this is possibly the best option. And it worked. And that was great. But that allowed the NHS to get that flexibility to get that up-to-date information on the ground. Some of the areas we were also looking at, I also had to support through SJC Op Caribbean, which didn't help. So these guys were flicking. That was looking at possible hurricane season coming later on the year in the Caribbean. We did advice and guidance on the mortuary side of life. Advice and guidance, we set up the first static testing facility in Nottingham, which was the pilot program. And then obviously we had the others to go. And also the horrible thing to say, this is a military day job as well. So that was all going on in the background. So as you can see, I think coming on to the last point, thriving under pressure is something that us military guys and girls absolutely love. And it's one of the things. And one of my biggest challenges at 2IC, sat back in an ops room, was when the tasks were getting nearly completed, to turn around to my individuals and say, right, guys, it's now time to call out and you're going to come back. Every single man said, no, we want to stay till the bitter end, please. And that was the piece when it comes to dedicated and committed. And that's, I think, we get it within the military side of life. Mm. And the last one for me is the fitness perspective. Lots of people sort of, yeah, okay, no problems at all. And it's been proven recently when it comes to the fitness side of life that, yes, it gives us that flexibility to perhaps go a little bit longer at pace, like the Brigadier said. It also is proven that obviously being fit and healthy, with a healthy lifestyle, which we're getting into now more with our food, but it gives you that capability to go longer, make decisions, especially when you're tired. And these guys are always trained on that. And out of all that, I just think I want to wrap up, and this is perhaps some of the audience wouldn't know, but every year we go through values and standards, and it's driven to us in the military. And the various, I keep touching my fingers, I don't know why, but the various points, the courage side of life, discipline, respect for others, integrity, selfless commitment are those key functions that we get taught every single year. Mm. And out of that, perhaps not relevant in the civilian community, but it's lawful, appropriate, and totally professional. So those sort of 8 key points are what get driven to us every single year. And I think it becomes second nature to a lot of the military guys, which is so beneficial, obviously, when it comes to working in that civilian organisation. I'm going to stop at the minute and open to questions.
Simon, thank you. And you're absolutely right. Those values never leave you. You know, I hope to be a proud proponent of ex-military personnel in civilian organisations. And you've just highlighted all of the key skills and all of the, you know, the main points that I hammer home to these civilian organisations around the ability to understand, plan, deliver in crisis, being calm under pressure, you know, that resilience, the dedication, the loyalty, respect, integrity, you know, all of these things are fantastic. But I do think as military personnel or former military personnel, we bring these values with us when we leave the forces. So it's so true. I'm going to open it up to questions now. We've got some waiting for us. So I'm going to go straight into Alison. Thank you very much. She says, amazing leadership and support that you're providing. Thank you. And she said, what has been the impacts to your own plans, strategies and objectives of this lending of skills and resources? So Simon, you touched on it. You said that, you know, you still have to do your military day job. So has it had an impact, and what has that impact been?
In all honesty, I can say that I don't think there's been a massive impact, apart from obviously the focus element where we've got to focus. Working as we are, so not coming together, has proved difficult, but again, we've adapted and overcome. But I think coming back to the actual rescript piece, this was something that we were doing. It was part of our mission statement. We've practiced for it, not so much on such a scale, but for us on that small cog that I see us into that NHS support, that's where it was key that we could deliver. We knew exactly what we're doing. We knew exactly what we wanted to do because we'd been training for it, and our guys were qualified to do it. So yeah, we got the direction from SJC. This is what you need to do, and we got after it and did it. I would like to think quite successfully.
One of my favourite words, and I use it still today, is just crack on and get the job done. What an incredible effort. This is from an anonymous, and they say, do you feel, and Brigadier, I'm going to come to you for this one, do you feel that the military contribution has been given the recognition it deserves?
Well, firstly, I say that we're not in it for the recognition. We're in it because it's the right thing to do, and there's a national need, and you know, we are absolutely, as the military, in support of the government, in support of the Department for Health and Social Care, Cabinet Office, everybody. We are always in support of. And therefore, quite frankly, we're happy to be in the background, getting on with things, doing things, getting the job done, and then moving on to the next job. Now, as it happens, we have had quite a bit of positive publicity, whether it's military officers standing on the podium with the Prime Minister, whether it's newspaper articles, whether it's just feedback from the NHS, from colleagues saying, you know, we just love having your people here. What an honour, what a privilege. You're doing great work. So I think we are getting enough, but we're not in it for the recognition. So whatever we get is a bonus, quite frankly.
Good to hear. The military has always, and this is a question from Pete Horrell, he says, the military has always, in my experience, been superb in risk-based decision-making at pace and without unhelpful emotional baggage. Have you been able to use this to feed into recommended ways forward through SAGE, etc., or do you have to leave this to the politicians? Brigadier, I'll come to you.
Yeah, that's a nice one. I think that really goes back to what I just said about always being in support. And so I mentioned the fact that we'd deployed 1,200 planners into government departments, into regional area, into local resilience forums. They were very much in support. So they bring a certain way of doing things, a certain set of skills, and we provide advice on how we think, the plan should be formulated, how you should make decisions. But we don't interfere in that process in as much as all we do is offer advice. Sometimes people take that advice and change their own processes accordingly, and other times they choose not to, and both are fine. We are there to provide that advice rather than to make the decisions ourselves.
True.
Nicola, can I add to that?
Oh, of course you can, Simon.
No, because this is one of my personal experiences that I've had sort of dealing, especially on the UK resilience bits. And this is one of the unfortunate things that happens when it comes to media. When the media turn up on site, they look up and start their cameras. And when they see a military person standing there, they automatically run over. All our guys were given very, very clear direction right from the start through SJC that we are there to support. We are there to support, and that was driven right from the start. But of course, the media sometimes portrayed that slightly incorrect by running over to the military and saying, you're here and well done. So it is frustrating sometimes that we get the cameras pushed at the military guys. My personal example was at Whaley Bridge, and the guys came over to me and I literally pointed them in direction to gold and bronze commands, as we should do. So yeah, there is a perception piece out there sometimes.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. If I think back to my own experience, I was the Arabic media spokesperson for the British Army in Basra a long time ago. So I have very much dealt with that side of the media, and yeah, it is frustrating. I remember that frustration as well. So yeah, very true. Nicola asks us, what is your view of the key leadership traits that are critical to leading teams successfully in a crisis? Simon, I'm going to come to you first on this one. So what are the you've mentioned lots of leadership traits, but if you could point out the key ones.
And this is where it's difficult because sometimes leadership, everyone's got their own opinion of leadership. Is it taught, educated? Is it natural? And most of these, it's a yes, yes, yes. But in the military side of life, it's the training piece, and that's where it goes back to nurture and foster the capabilities of the individual to build them through, regardless of rank, and that's what we do. Within the military, there are those key ranks. So corporal is always a key rank, warrant officers are a key rank, and captains are always key ranks. And why? Because they're the doers. And that's what normally happens. But then you've got sort of the deciding people. So leadership within the military is very difficult because you've got so many different levels and complexities within that. But saying all that, the guys get leadership training, but it's how they take it and how they want to move it forward. And so I don't think that answers the question, but leadership in itself, I think we could go on for a long time to talk about leadership.
Yeah.
But for us in the military, I think it's taught.
Brigadier, do you have a view on that?
I do. It's a great question, by the way. And interestingly, as I said at the beginning, I was very privileged to command a US task force in Afghanistan for 9 months recently. And I was asked this question when I came back. And I gave it some thought, and I had a little bit of time to think about it. And I sort of came back a few days later and spoke about it. I think everything that Simon said, absolutely true. And I don't disagree with anything he's saying. I sort of give a slightly different answer on it. One of my personal heroes from the Second World War is an officer, a great officer, General Bill Slim, who commanded the 14th Army in Burma, the Forgotten Army. And he spoke to Sandhurst cadets a few years after he came back from that particular campaign and talked about leadership. And he talked about leadership ultimately being simply about you. It's a very sort of personal thing. It's the way you are. And in my experience, every single organization, whether it's a military organization or a business, it's ultimately, it will reflect the person that runs it. culture, the ethos, the way of doing business. Is it a nice place to work? Is it not a nice place to work? It's all about the person at the top. And I fundamentally believe that is true. And that got me to think about what it is about leading in a crisis. What are the leadership traits that you really need? And I think that you can teach leadership. I do firmly believe that. I was an instructor at Sandhurst and an instructor at the Defence Academy. So I do firmly believe that you can teach leadership. A lot of it is personal, but you can improve. You can always improve. And I actually think that leading in a crisis is about not the science of leadership. I think it's about the art of leadership, and there's a big difference. And I think that for me, and I was thinking about how to sort of explain this, and I would say, and it's a little bit trite, but please forgive me, I think the three attributes you need in a crisis as a leader are A, R, and T. Which helps me remember my simple military mind. I think for A, it's all about articulate. It's about explain what it is you want people to do. And the clearer you can make that in terms of your vision, your objectives, your priorities, your staff will then understand what you need to get done. That's the first thing, articulate. And I think secondly, the R for me is about relationships. It's about having relationships with your staff, with your commanders, with local leaders. And that's very much the case for us here, actually. You know, the real power of our footprint around the UK, the 10 joint military commands, are the relationships that we've already had in place before the operation even started. It's about, you know, making friends before you need them. That's the relationship bit. And then the T, and maybe the most important thing for me, is about trust, and about trusting your people to do what you've asked them to do. And that in the military, and you'll remember this from your time, is about mission command. Don't tell people how to do things. Tell them what you want them to do, what needs to be done, and then trust them to get on with it. And if you can articulate, build relationships and trust people, doesn't matter where you are, whether it's business, in my opinion, never worked in the commercial sector, but I think it must be quite similar. If you've got those three things in place, then whatever the crisis, I think you'll deal with it.
That's a fantastic summation, and I shall use that now as I go forward and continue on in my career in the banking world. But I think you're absolutely right. And I use the words mission command with my team a lot. And I say, I'm going to give you a job to do, but I'm going to leave you to do it. So I definitely have taken that from Sandhurst. And you're right about leaders being authentic. You know, you can't follow someone unless they are authentic in themselves. So I absolutely agree with that. Sean asks, how has the diversity, so we're in a diversity project event today, so it's key that we bring up diversity. So how has the diversity of the military thought process and indeed personnel helped with this operation in particular, and indeed any unintended outcomes of this operation particularly have come to light? So I guess we've kind of covered some of that in the terms of how we've worked with the NHS, or how the military has worked with the NHS. I can't see it. It's still got green blood going through my veins. You're still part of the family. But how do you think the diversity of the military thought process and personnel has helped this operation in particular? Any thoughts on that?
Do you want me to start with this one as well?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, okay. I think well, diversity is really important, and I'm not just saying that because I'm of the audience that I'm speaking to. But for example, the headquarters that I run here, we are not an army headquarters. We are a defence headquarters. We're a joint headquarters. So in this organisation, I've got just over 100 staff officers at the moment, officers and soldiers, and from all three services. Regular and reserves. I've got civilian contractors as well. So, you know, just from saying that, I hope I've sort of, you know, assured people that we've got diverse ways at coming at things. The Army doesn't think the same as the Navy, it doesn't think the same as the Air Force. And, you know, reserves have a different perspective, which we tap into as much as we possibly can. And the reserves have done amazing things on this operation. You know, really genuinely game-changing things that they have brought to this campaign that as a regular officer probably wouldn't even think that way. So, you know, we try and draw that in as much as we possibly can. It's not always easy because the military does have a process and we go to the same, defence academy, and we get taught how to think about certain problems and go through steps in order to come up with a plan. But anybody that's clever about this will bring in alternative views. And we've certainly done that here. And I know that happens regularly, not just here in the headquarters, but out in the various regions as well. And we couldn't do what we do without, for example, the reserves doing such a great job.
Yeah, it's true.
It's important, and I think despite the fact that sometimes people think the military are just one tracked, I think actually people will be surprised about how diverse we are now.
I'm going to go to Simon for this question. How does the military help their personnel combat burnout? And during crises, adrenaline must help at the start, but what about as time goes on and people get exhausted?
Well, this is something that we brought in really quickly. SJC gave us the flexibility that we could stand more people up because they knew that at some point, again, we were given a 2 to 3 day window from our mission statement to get down there and look at it. That then extended by quite a few weeks. So within a very, very tight time frame, we knew that these guys are going to burn out really quickly. We then worked with the NHS to come up with a routine where we could get these guys out. But again, we had to do it really, really carefully because of the COVID situation. So it's monitoring your people. We then go back to the leadership piece, and this is where we put so much faith in our guys because we were trying to keep the movement of people across the whole of UK down to sort of nigh on zero. So the teams, we were doubling up with teams and sending them down. And I dare say your brother might argue with me, and he says, I went for 7 days without any sleep. We allowed those guys to make the decision as well, because obviously we were not there. As a headquarters, we were sat back in a nice warm office with the capability to go into a warm bed, where these guys were bouncing from hotels, TA reserve centres, and some of them actually going home and sleeping in garages. So we had to come up and we had to give that. And the guys on the ground did an absolute superb job, and they were keeping us informed. But we also allowed our NHS colleagues to give us that feedback as well, because they were there. And we came up with a rule mont, if you like, where we were actually swapping people out and making sure that people had downtime. And how were we doing that? One of the biggest things, we were turning off communications. So we were turning off internet, turning off mobile phones, and telling these people to hand them over. So if we ever heard of a conversation or an email from an individual, then that was one of my first jobs to get on there. So it was monitored very quickly. Yes, the guys were asked to do a long periods and stints just to get the job done. But again, we didn't hear many complaints.
And it goes back to the values, doesn't it? But it also goes back to that level of resilience. I think that we are taught very quickly through our early training right the way through. You just got to get on with it and head down and knuckle on through, don't we? And I think that resilience comes through. Totally
agree. The old school, get your head down and get on with it, so long as support is there. And I think that's what us, the headquarters back in sort of Nottingham, were able to give quite well. And then through SJC, every time I asked for something through the chain of command, it was given. So yeah, it's the support element that's got to come up to allow these guys to work at that sort of place.
It's a really good point. One of the things I always think about when I think about the difference between the military and civilian organisations is, as a military officer, I felt a sense of responsibility for my people, for my staff. And I think that really comes in and comes to the fore. Whereas you're perhaps not given quite so much responsibility in the civilian world. You're more accountable for your people, whereas in the military, you're responsible for them. So you have to make sure they're looked after. So absolutely, 100% agree. One other question here, it says, from Sean again, he says, what can the military take away from the NHS and use in their world? It's an interesting one. Brigadier?
Yeah, that is an interesting one. Before I answer that, can I just kind of go back to the previous question? I should have jumped in. Actually, I think I completely agree with what Simon just said about the importance of mental health and well-being and all the support being in place.
Yeah.
I think it's important to stress that, because whilst we are a Wilco organisation and we do get on with things, we are not blind to the fact that it affects people in different ways, and sometimes people need support. And it's provided. I think actually what it does highlight, the very question itself, is this is a challenging operation, not just the scale and the complexity, but I think, from a military person, I've done 8 operational tours, and they're never easy, but in some ways going up into an operational environment, you're in a bubble almost. You go and you get a job done. you know your family's at home, but you're not sort of having to go home yourself and live at home, and you're not necessarily worried about your family in danger terms like you are at the moment. All the military people that are providing support also have families, often are going home, trying to do other jobs, trying to balance things with the job that they're doing to support the government's pandemic response. And so that in itself has brought some extra pressure and continues to do so. So it's just an added complication that I wanted to bring out. It's not a straightforward one. And in many ways, UK operations are more complex as a result than going to Afghanistan or whatever. It's nothing easy about that, but you're in a bubble, and that makes it different. So right now I've actually forgotten what the question was, which is very good.
But it's a really good point. I use the term the military bubble a lot. So what can the military take away from the NHS and use in their world?
Wow. Well, I think firstly, let me say up front that the NHS are an amazing organisation, and they have done the hard yards, as we would describe it in the military. We've come in over the last 6 weeks or so en masse. I was part of the process of identifying where our medics and where our troops needed to go in order to provide support. But the NHS is 1.3 million in terms of staff. It's the biggest employer in Europe, as I'm sure everyone knows. So they've been in this fight now for a year, and they've done amazing work. So, the first thing that I would take away from the NHS is what a great organisation and how resilient those people are as well, and worthy of our respect and our support. So what we've done, we've sort of almost like put a finger in a leaking dam in certain regions, and it's been that level of support, but we've been useful in the respect of just calming the situation down a bit. And some of our medics and some of our troops now are lifting off those tasks because the NHS have got in a better place. So a lot of respect for what they do. I think that we've sort of learned, I think our soldiers that have deployed into that environment, have got lots of plaudits, but they've also learned a lot themselves about, a different way of approaching things, challenges. And interestingly, a lot of those soldiers, when we talk to them, actually want more opportunities in the future to go back into the NHS. Like the medics want to go back and work there on secondment because they're learning so much.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And
they appreciate the environment. And so it's a mutual thing. And the scale is really important to understand. And it's slightly frustrating, going back to what Simon said, is that when the press do turn up in hospitals, they immediately gravitate towards the uniforms. And the uniformed soldiers do want to step back and say, hey, we've only been here for a few weeks. These people have been here for a year. Yeah. So they speak to them rather than give us all the attention. So, but we've learned a lot from them, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. We're coming up to time now, unfortunately, because I think I could sit here and talk to you both all day. It's been fascinating and brilliant, and it's taken me back, as you could imagine. I'm going to ask for one final point from both of you. And one of my senior leaders in my organisation so succinctly put it. She said, Kelly, most of us couldn't fight our way out of the paper bag, let alone lead tactical and strategic change. So what is it that makes ex-military personnel different? Simon, let me come to you.
Just from that analogy, I think they believe in themselves. They've had all the training, they've been given ample opportunities, and they believe in themselves and their own capabilities. And I think that's something in the military that we give. So you might find that the military guy is slightly more forward-leaning than most people. And some people might find that slightly strange, but I think that is. I think it's belief in oneself. And that's like I say, the training, the opportunities, the capabilities we're given. So the one trait I'd say, that's it, more than anything.
Thank you. And Brigadier?
Yeah, what a tough question if it's one thing.
One thing.
Okay, I'll answer the question though. If it's one thing, I would sort of go back to what I said actually in my initial pitch. I think I completely agree with Simon. Confidence is really important. I think the resilience piece, I think that the experience, doesn't matter whether you serve 2, 3, 30 years, like me, because I ran out of imagination and just keep doing the same thing. But I think that we have a unique perspective on situations because we've been in them many, many times. And we're just used to operating in uncertainty. we don't need clarity. We just need an 80% solution on time, and we'll get on with things, and then we'll adjust as we go along. And that's the way that we do our business. So I think that is something that's potentially quite unique, and it's going to work in any environment, I think.
I think you're right. So I think that really sums it all up for us. And I think my last thing to say is to any of the attendees today, if you're interested in learning more about military veterans, please contact the Diversity Project Veterans Workstream. We would be happy to set some time up with you, probably virtually for the next 6 months or so, but we'd be happy to support. And don't forget about signing the Armed Forces Covenant. So the Armed Forces Covenant is a public declaration that you would not actively dissupport military personnel and veterans. So it's a really worthwhile thing to sign as a civilian organisation, and I'm proud to say my organisation has signed it and is an MOD Gold Award employee engagement through the employee engagement scheme. So it's fantastic. Obviously, at the end of this, I have to say a massive thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Oxley, Brigadier Tingey. It has been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today. So thank you. And I hope to one day perhaps see you in person, get you up to Canary Wharf, and perhaps we can do some more events of this type. So thank you. And I hope to all the attendees you've enjoyed our presentation today. And we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for having us.
Not at all.